Carl, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and really excited to hear all about your career before Salesforce and what makes you the solution architect, technical architect, whatever you are doing right now, and the role you're playing on the projects you're working on. So let's look backwards and look at what you did before Salesforce, and then we can look forwards towards the end of the podcast. So yeah, what did you do before the world of Salesforce?
Yeah, interesting question, Ben, and thank you for having me on. I did a heap of things. I will try to keep this as quick as I can, but if I give you a quick overview, it might help with some of the discussion going forward. And by the way, I have to say through this, I've been very lucky to be given so many opportunities through my working career, and you'll probably get a feel for that when I tell you what I've done. But it all started with digital and electronics engineering at RMIT. I didn't finish it. I got about 3 years in, and then there was a life-changing event, and of all things, I flipped to nursing. So I went straight from tech into something completely non-tech related, and did that for a number of years, which was a great skill to have when you're out backpacking around the world and things like that. It was awesome. There was a worldwide nursing shortage, so it was awesome to be able to go and work in a career kind of way, rather than behind a bar making $1 an hour, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then when I got back, I decided that I had to move on and come up and do something different. I was really interested in what the reps were doing at the hospital, so I started speaking to them, and I ended up moving into pharmaceutical repping. So I moved from the hospital system out into GP land, and I was talking to doctors about drugs and medication and why they should use them. That was the basis for my sales training, which I then took into selling technology into hospitals. And so I started working for a company called Abbott. They're a big global company, and they did lots of devices for pain control and infusing drugs and things like that. Yep. So I was selling that tech to the hospital networks, then became product manager for that team. So I was responsible for about 800 products and had to move to Sydney to do that. That was awesome. Did that for a couple of years. And then we had a young family, so I decided to come back to Melbourne. So in coming back to Melbourne, I had to find another gig. I wasn't allowed to bring that job back to Melbourne with me. So I ended up getting a business development role through Southeast Asia. And so I started setting up distributors in India and Malaysia and Thailand for medical devices. That was great, but with the young family, the travel was huge. So, there was a lot of travel required. So I found another medical device manufacturer who was focused on the local market and worked for them. So I was working away for them, and they needed a CRM. They were expanding into the US, and that was when I got exposed to Salesforce as a customer. We implemented Salesforce, immediately found there was a bit of a gap in the product way back then. And so I wrote an S control, and most of the people listening to this probably don't even know what an S control is, but it was the pre-Visualforce and Apex kind of era. And so I wrote a control to help customers who were having the same problem manage revenue schedules on opportunities. And I published it to the App Exchange. And I think I was the first customer in Australia to publish to the App Exchange. So that was kind of funny to do. And I got to know the Salesforce guys at that point. From there, decided consulting was the go. Really loved the product. Obviously, I'd been learning how it kind of worked and how to leverage it. So I wrote a business plan, gave it to Sean Stillwell of Square Peg back in the day, who was flying people down to Melbourne. He didn't have an office. And I said, if I hit the numbers on this sheet, could we perhaps set up an office in Melbourne? He said, yes, let's take a punt. And so I've got Sean Stillwell to thank for getting me into the industry.
So when you were a customer,
yeah,
what were you were a Salesforce user? That was your role at the time. Like you were using Salesforce for your opportunities and leads and so on. Yeah,
the company I was working for were expanding into the US, and they had a US sales team that were all over the country and had no CRM to manage pipeline activity, contacts, customer lists, etc. And so as the local guy, I was sitting in the office next to the managing director. He said, "Carl, you need to find us a CRM." And it was a long time ago, so SaaS was not at the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah.
And there was a guy called Troy Wesley from Salesforce, who was pretty much #1 employee on the ground in Australia, I think. Well, he was the rep. He came in, gave me a demo. And then from there, as they say, the rest's history, right? Bought the product, off we went.
Yeah, wow. So what was it that that made you decide to, like, obviously you must have had a technical element, right, to be able to write this S code, S
control?
Yeah.
And an S control is just like some HTML and JavaScript, right? So it's like a little web page that you could use like a Visualforce page. And I had no idea how to get started. And you may be familiar, there's a famous online presence who names himself SFDC Fox. The actual original post that I wrote to him, asking him for a bit of help, and him responding and sending me some code, that's still online somewhere. I even come across it sometimes, and it's back from 2010 or something. You know, those really old community posts that you might stumble across every now and again. Well, it's buried in there, and it was my initial introduction to this amazing person, this guy SFDC Fox, who's still in the ecosystem and very active today. And he said, "Look, I can help get you started. I'll give you a snippet of code of something I did," and I just ran with it from there.
Sure. Yeah, nice. So you were at that point still a sales guy. You reach out to Sean Stillwell. They were the first, or one of the first, consulting partners in Australia, right? Doing Salesforce like as a business.
Yeah, there was a range of boutique organizations. The ones that come straight to mind were D-Sales, who had been around right from the outset. Then there was Square Peg. I think even Cloud Sherpas may have even had somebody on the ground. So very few options for a company who wanted to implement Salesforce to go to.
Yeah. So your role with Sean, what you made this business plan, and that was like a sales-driven business plan around what you could bring in Melbourne, and were you going to be the delivery guy as well?
Yeah, I had to do it all. So the idea was, because I felt that I had a pretty good technical knowledge of the product, because it was so simple back then. There wasn't a lot Salesforce could do. I don't think you could change a login screen, or you couldn't tailor it particularly. It was very, very primitive compared to what it is now.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't that much to learn in relative terms. So straight away, felt reasonably confident with it. I had good local support from Jeff Chalice, who was the customer success manager of the day, based in Melbourne, and some other people who knew the product. And you just basically picked it up and ran with it. And so from a consulting perspective, you would sell a job and then you'd be on the ground delivering it the next day. And you'd still be on the phone trying to sell in next week's work.
Yeah, because I guess they were pretty small, like quick turnaround implementations. Because I hear these stories about people used to buy Salesforce on their credit card.
Yeah, that's right. That's the way the AEs used to sell it. So the Salesforce guys would say, "Oh, you just got to give us a credit card number and you're up and running." Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So it was really, obviously then services might be a little bit different, but they were quite quick turnaround projects. Nothing like a 1 year implementation like we get now.
No, absolutely not. No, and there was nothing you could have justified needing a year for, really. There was only a number of different levers and buttons you could pull to get Salesforce to do what you wanted. Yeah.
Sure. So what attracted you then to joining Salesforce?
Well, after Square Peg, I joined Salesforce as an engagement manager. And I really, kind of a recurring theme in this session for me to be, I really enjoyed the tech, loved the technology and what it could do for a client. So the opportunity came up to get Salesforce professional services going in Melbourne. There had been one guy on the ground for a while. He'd moved on. And so there was literally nobody representing Salesforce in a delivery capacity on the ground in Melbourne. So that opportunity came up. I took that. with both hands. And so it was almost like starting again with Square Peg, where there was account execs that you had to win over because they already had good relationships with the boutique partners of the day. And you had to build some trust. You had to build pipeline. I was told that we would resource up Melbourne once the pipeline existed. So I had to sell work. I had to deliver work. Yeah, once again, bit of a one-man band, and just relied a lot on subbing in work from some of the various partners that were around.
So you were subbing work off of partners back into Salesforce to do professional services?
Sometimes I needed extra hands to deliver work. And once some of the Visualforce Apex stuff came about, there were particular partners that were better at it than others. So you would, sub work out to them, but it was always Pro Services that owned the engagement end to end. And I was ultimately responsible, for delivering a good outcome, right?
Yeah, nice. So talking of Visualforce and Apex, and obviously you started in the ecosystem by writing an S control. So did you always from the early days have a technical slant, and did you pick up coding at that point relatively easily? Or did it take some time for you to be comfortable with it?
It actually took, a session with a guy called Chris Mail. And now Chris Mail, he's recently been one of the partners at PwC. Yeah. And he was a partner at Deloitte, I believe. Chris was the first developer on the ground for Salesforce that wrote Visualforce and Apex. And I was in the Sydney office for Salesforce, and when I was an engagement manager, Chris was busily squirreling away at a piece of code somewhere, and I knew that I had to be able to not only sell projects that required it, but I had to, being the only guy on the ground or the only person on the ground in Melbourne, I also had to have some degree of knowledge about what it would mean and be able to speak to developers about what is this Visualforce and Apex and so on. So Chris was kind enough to show me a hello world on Visualforce and Apex. So he literally wrote something in front of me within a matter of minutes, and that was my starting point. And I went, okay, I have to take that now and run with it. Pretty much got back to Melbourne, and the first thing that happened after that was I ended up having to write a Visualforce page for an enterprise customer that was using Salesforce in a number of different countries, and they wanted a Visualforce page to solve a particular issue. And so that was my first billable piece of work, trying to nut out Visualforce to stand this thing up for a global sales team. Yeah. And
so going back to that point, was I mean, I would like to presume there were, but were there things like developer orgs and that was always a thing, or were you building straight into production back then?
No, you weren't building into production. There were sandboxes, and it was if I'm thinking back to that particular example, there was they had a range of resources available. They're a large organisation. I won't name them, but they had pretty much every checkbox ticked on the statement of work on the MSU, I think. Yeah. On the MSU. So
yeah, you were cutting your teeth with development, but it was still relatively safe. You weren't doing anything straight into production back then, or.
Well, all I thought was there's not a heck of a lot of people who are going to be able to help me around. At the time, you had to just figure it out and test it thoroughly yourself. There really wasn't a clear point of view on DevOps. There wasn't the tooling around either. It was pretty much lift and shift with Ant and moving metadata around. That was it.
Yeah. So at what point, and maybe you don't now even, at what point did you class yourself as an IT professional and not a salesperson?
I've always had a bit of an identity crisis in this whole ecosystem. I think, Ben, we've had little interactions on and off over time. And I think you've asked me, what kind of role might I be looking for or whatever. And I find that a really hard question to answer. The reason for that is I've often been called, somebody that's good at most things on the platform, but master of none, right? I don't fall into, a purely technical stream. I enjoy pre-sales as well. I love ideating how we might solve problems with clients. So it's always felt like a bit of selling, and the tech's just the fun bit at the end of that process. If you're an engagement manager, you're still selling anyway. I think everybody's selling because in a pre-sales or selling cycle, it's obvious what you're doing. When you go into delivery mode, you still got to bring the client along on the ride. Sometimes you have to make compromises that are in their best interests. And so you need to present those compromises in the best possible light.
Yeah.
You need to do that with confidence. You need to do it with knowledge behind you. You can't, fake it till you make it. I think people see through that within seconds for the most part. And so in a lot of respects, I think there's just a huge overlap between sales and delivery in terms of those kind of skills. So if they're the main thing that I'm bringing to the table, I'm really not sure whether I'm a sales guy or an IT professional, because they're the things that I kind of focus on, right? Just trying to tell the story in a non-technical way.
Which is the skill set that kind of everyone wants and everyone needs, right? It's the ability to talk to a room and talk in different terms and different ways so that everyone understands. Yeah,
I think so. And when you hear people talking and it's predominantly to a client or a non-Salesforce client, or even somebody that's purchased it, and they're using a lot of Salesforce terminology, I kind of tend to wince a little bit. It's like that isn't going to resonate with the person you're speaking to. So you've got to always be mindful of who you're talking to, and the kind of conversation they want to have as well. You could be talking to an enterprise architect who knows they've got Salesforce but has no clue what leads mean in the Salesforce context, or campaigns, or have any awareness of it other than, look, I know it's a box in the technical landscape in our organization, but it's just one of many. So from a terminology perspective, I think you've just got to keep things real from the client perspective. So
yeah, absolutely. So what about the talent pool then? So you really have seen the evolution of Salesforce in the region. You've seen the good, the bad, and the indifferent. So yeah, from a talent pool perspective, how has it evolved? Like you struggled to find people to help with a Visualforce page back however long ago that was, and now there's obviously everyone's looking to get into the ecosystem. So at what point was the market starting to really hot up for talent?
I can't remember a time where the market wasn't crying out for, I think, skilled resources. I think there's always been resources around, but the numbers are obviously swelling dramatically. But I feel like, and maybe I could be being a bit harsh, I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of people have come in to this ecosystem, but perhaps the experience and the scars that some clients want, they want people to come in who've had exposure to a wide range or a large number of projects and had a lot of time on the keyboard or in front of clients doing workshops for this particular product, and they haven't had that exposure yet. So I think we've got a lot of people coming in, but it's giving them that opportunity to build their skill sets. I think that's the bit that's tough at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. We've been doing our surveys recently, and we haven't released the findings, but we're in the process of just getting that all sorted. And one of the questions we've asked, different skill sets, we break it down. So admins get asked admin questions, technical architects get asked technical architect questions. But one of the questions we've asked certain skill sets is to comment on the ecosystem and how they would, I guess, how they would perceive the talent pool in the market, and the things that we've heard consistently are not candidate short any longer. Like it's not that there aren't enough people, it's quality and experience short, and which I think aligns to what you're saying, right? If you want a Salesforce developer, you can find a Salesforce developer. It's not that they don't exist, but the top quality ones, the ones that do have those war stories and have got the battle scars from working on complex pieces of work, maybe even outside of Salesforce, and bringing that knowledge into the ecosystem, that's kind of where we're lacking.
Yeah, and I completely concur with that. It's the next challenge for the industry. I think there's a lot of interest. People realize it's a hot market. There's jobs to be had, but it's almost flicking to some of the things you go through on some of your posts on LinkedIn, right? It's about, well, how do you present yourself in the best possible light as well? Because people aren't just going to hand over an opportunity to you. In some respects, you've got to make it happen. You've got to, for example, if I try and think of myself, so I wrote the business plan to give to Sean. Okay, I reached out and said, I want this, but I need your inputs to make it happen. I've worked with people who've come into the industry and suggested they build a portfolio of examples of their own work. Why not build something in the evening one night and show us how good you are with your lightning component skills? Or, you might build a flow that does some funky thing, like whatever it is, the kind of skills you think you have that you can bring to the table, you've got to sell yourself. And I think that's potentially where people are falling over, and it's the biggest opportunity for someone to make themselves stand out as well.
Yeah,
because people don't do it often. I've even seen someone gave feedback to you. You must have suggested a similar thing, I think, with building a sample project or something that they can showcase to a recruiter or a client even. And I think that's absolutely the best advice you can give anyone to
100%.
To get over that hump of, I don't have the experience yet, but I'm so keen.
Yeah, it's the differentiator, right? Because not everyone's doing it, but everyone is getting certifications and everyone is doing trailhead badges. So it's like the next step on from that to show you can come up with something yourself and execute. And so you've worked with, obviously I'm focusing on developers here a little bit, but you've worked with a lot of developers over the years, I'm sure. Yeah. What is the difference between having a really good developer and a really bad developer on a project? Like how much of an impact does the quality of a developer make to you as even a technical architect, or if you're putting yourself in the client's shoes, like, that how important is it that they're getting that right and getting the right developer in the business?
Well, I think it's pretty clear what the differences are between a good developer and a not so good developer. That's been published by many people over as long as there's been devs in the Salesforce world. The impact they have is huge, because not done right, scripting in Salesforce, being a multi-tenant environment, it's got to be clean, it's got to be efficient, and it's got to be tested thoroughly. And that's probably a key mantra for any software engineering, I guess, and writing code. But all the principles remain the same in Salesforce, whether they do as for writing any code outside of Salesforce. I think, it's got to be neat, it's got to be readable, it's got to be robust, it has to be looking at positive and negative test cases, it's got to be modularized and built for reuse wherever absolutely possible, and ready to hand over to the next dev who comes along. Now, if you lift the bonnet on lots of orgs, we're still going through a bit of a maturity or a maturing phase, I guess, because there's still a lot of people out there writing code that doesn't necessarily align to those sorts of ideals.
But why?
Why? I think, and maybe this is changing more so now as more people come into this industry from coding backgrounds. So people who've actually been schooled in writing code as compared to people like myself who might have come from totally non-dev backgrounds, right? And they've been schooled on these kinds of things. And some of the most amazing devs I've seen were working for a particular ISV. They were writing amazing code, and they were pretty much just fresh out of school, but they'd learned C#, .NET, whatever, those sort of languages. I think they'd been writing stuff for Android. They decided to give this a crack because there was jobs to be had. And it took them about 6 weeks to convert over and be writing amazing quality code very quickly. People who come in and don't have that kind of schooling don't appreciate perhaps some of the impact that their sloppiness or the way they're writing might actually be an anti-pattern and not something that's recommended on the platform. They may not have a good grasp of, really now a developer on Salesforce, you can be exposed to what? Apex, still Visualforce in some cases. You've got the JavaScript to cope with, Aura framework, Lightning Web Components. You name it. There's a whole raft of things. I keep finding that full stack developers who come in seem to be able to just look at that stuff and barely bat an eyelid, whereas people who are coming in and learning it from the Salesforce perspective and starting there, it's much more of a struggle.
Sure.
To pick it up.
That schooling thing is it's so true, and I think like that it comes down because there's so much information out there now. Like it is sloppy if you don't take on, but if you want to be a good developer, you can become a good developer by reading what's online and studying. Like you don't have to have someone looking over your shoulder, looking at your code, telling you what's right and wrong. But that helps, right? So I think if you've had a good mentor and you've had a good tech lead, and I had a kind of technical architect I was speaking to this week, we were talking about this topic, and they said, in those engineering teams, you have a head of engineering, you have a tech lead, and they're the ones reviewing your code, and they're the ones giving you feedback and taking you on that journey. And they're expecting that if they give you feedback, you don't make that same mistake again. Like you address that, and maybe that's what's been lacking in that the software engineering team leadership managing Salesforce devs. And I think that's changing now. Like we're seeing more and more software engineering companies hiring for Salesforce engineers rather than Salesforce developers.
Yeah. Awesome.
But the expectation is so much higher from these companies.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's such a good thing, right? It's so good, because the only thing that can happen is the quality of the work will go up, and the structure or the support around an individual who's wanting to take this on and learn it and become really proficient at it and build a career doing it. It's so much better than just being left to your own devices and copy pasting something from a trailhead into an org and going, okay, yeah, I've got that. There's a super badge or something, and now I'm good to go.
Yeah.
I know enough to be dangerous, right?
I work with realestate.com in Melbourne, and they when they're hiring for their devs, they have a technical test that isn't Salesforce. I've had people do it in TypeScript, but some developers just to see it and they're like, I won't do that, I can't do that, like that's not my bag. And that's the kind of, it makes it more challenging for me, right? Because there's less people that can do that. But it's interesting that that's the kind of like these people are just they're working on Salesforce in the business, but they're expected to be able to show that they can do something outside of Salesforce.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that makes complete sense to me, given what I observed with these graduates who full stack devs walk straight in. The whole Apex Lightning Web Component thing, it's just another language to them. So I think that's why they just pick it up so quickly. So sure. I think, and I think that's a challenge, right? You interview some candidates that say they're senior devs, but there's a little asterisk on the end that comes out during an interview process where it's, well, I'm really good with Visualforce. And that's kind of where it stops, right? And they haven't had the exposure to the other styles of coding and the other skills required in a Salesforce environment, which I find surprising.
Yeah, sure.
I would have thought they'd want to probably hone those skills themselves and learn before they turn up for an interview, right? So,
well, you'd think. Final question on devs, and this is a hot topic at the moment. It's so I've got a lot of developer roles on at the moment, and I posted about it on LinkedIn this week, and someone said, well, you know, why so many developer roles? If Salesforce are pushing the clicks not code, why are there so many developer roles? And actually, are they developer roles, or are they the companies think they need a developer, but actually it can all be done with flows now? So what's your observation on that? Like, do customers need as many devs as we're seeing, or you know, are there reasons perhaps that they don't? What's your view?
When you posed this question, I thought, well, who's asking for the dev? Is it the client saying they need a dev? And are they, like, I'm not sure how these requests for resources come through to you, Ben, but I would think that there's going to be a subset of all the requests you get. There'll be a subset that actually just need an admin, or when I say just an admin, I mean, some admins are amazing, right? What they can do with the point and click tools. So I don't want to make that sound derogatory in any way, but they're just different, right? It's a different skill set. And the client might not have any requirement for code, and yet they're asking for a dev. So that might be one subset. Then you get this situation where there's clients that have combinations, and I reckon this would be fairly common, combinations of configured automation and code. And there's, you know, an interplay between the two things, and that makes environments probably a bit brittle, right? And prone to breaking or having things go wrong. So I would say there's going to probably, unfortunately, be developers required to fix things like that, refactor things. There's still going to be large clients that, or clients that are really pushing the bounds of their governors on environments. And as a result, code's always going to have more potential to be more efficient than the configured approach. So hence they'll require a developer for sure. And then there's all the custom UI stuff, because if it takes you 6 clicks to get a particular job done, most people can see the value in probably getting a widget built or some sort of UI adaptation done to make it, refine it down to a couple of clicks or a single click.
Yeah, I mean, on to your point about like how do the requirements come through? It's obviously it's a mixed bag, but more often than not, a client has in their head the vision of what they want, right, or what they need, and often it's led by, we need a Salesforce developer, and then we'll unpick that a little bit. Like I had a client that reached out to me the other day, and they said we need a functional business analyst or something along those lines. I was like, okay, cool. Well, like, what will they be doing on a day-to-day basis? And it turns out that they were going to be building a community, and they didn't need front-end development skills because they had a front-end team that were doing a custom front-end on the community, but they did require someone that had Apex skills, right? So that the person would need to be able to code in Apex. So when I asked them why they called it a technical business analyst, it was because they felt they needed a developer, hence the word technical, but they also needed someone that can speak to the business and communicate with the business. And that's why they bolted business analyst on. So really it was a developer role that could communicate to the business, but it was called a functional business analyst or technical business analyst. When in reality, it was neither, like it wasn't a technical, like it was a developer role, right? They need to be able to write Apex. And I think the expectation with most developers from a company would be that they can write Apex, but they can also do configuration and do the declarative stuff when that's the best solution.
Great.
Whereas I think when someone's hiring an admin, they're not looking for someone that can do declarative and programmatic. They're looking for someone that can do declarative, and then they bring in a developer if they need the programmatic stuff done. So I think the expectation from a developer is they should be able to do both.
Yeah, I would agree. And probably, a good developer knows when not to code just as readily as they can, hit the keyboard up and create code as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So what's changed over the years? Obviously, things have got more complex, but what are the biggest challenges you're seeing customers face right now that they weren't facing many years ago?
Ooh. To be honest, I think that the tech, the tech is the easiest part. The reason I say that, when you think about it, it's totally predictable. You tell it to do a certain thing, you know it's going to do it, right? That's what the technology is. And then even if it doesn't do that, because you've built a bug in somewhere or an unintended feature, you know, you have a process to kind of unwind that, get it out and fix it, and you're on your merry way. So why does it seem so hard? I think it's the biggest change from, in my opinion, it's the initial uptake and the ongoing adoption. It's the change management piece. History in the projects I've worked in, to me, change is something that gets squished and kind of compressed down to help kind of achieve maybe a particular number or work something into a budget. There's constant compromises and pressure against really good change management. I've seen it done really, really well, and I've seen it done, well, non-existent, right? It's the tech's the panacea that's just going to magically make everything better. But it always boils down to people. So if you're looking after all the individuals that are affected by the tech being implemented in the first place, and considering what's going to happen in their world and what the change is for them, and, you know, even what's in it for them. I mean, a lot of projects just don't even think about that. They just kind of deliver on the stated requirement. I say a lot of projects, you know, I don't have any stats to back that, right? But it's just a gut feel. It's a gut feel. And it seems to be something that the industry struggled with for so long. So maybe there's something in it, right?
Sure.
When you look at the stats on failed CRM implementations, the tech doesn't fail itself. It's people saying this is not doing what we want it to do. So, you know, have a look at the people and their frustrations, and you can usually work backwards from there and see that perhaps certain affected cohorts of people or individuals even weren't considered when this thing was put in place, right? So I think effective change management has to be part of any of these implementations, and it has to be part of a company's kind of psyche when they implement Salesforce. So that's one of the biggest challenge, I think. And I would have said another one is the fact that Salesforce, the only thing that stays the same about Salesforce is it keeps changing, right? It keeps evolving. 3 major releases a year. Now, you know, lots of organizations traditionally who are looking at something like Salesforce have got slow changing technology layers. You know, these things have been embedded for years. There's certain governance models, application lifecycle management, processes and frameworks in place that don't necessarily align to the fact that Salesforce changes so quickly, right? You know, things that you couldn't have built 1 or 2 releases ago suddenly are a baked-in feature that you just flick a switch and you can now do it. You know, think about all the Kanban boarding and things that people do in list views, you know, stuff like that. Clients ask for it. Now it's just baked in.
How long have you been crying out for dynamic forms then?
Yeah, I think I wrote something going, yay, that's finally here. And then somebody within my organization pointed out, yeah, but for custom objects only. I nearly cried, but
yeah.
You know, but these are all the great, you know, you think about how much tech debt that's just going to make kind of redundant, right? All these custom interfaces and workarounds people have done for years to try to make better user interfaces. And we're on the cusp of having more and more capability, right, within a point and click kind of approach. So it's exciting times for new customers. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I was working with someone to do some work with dynamic forms in my org, and they're like an experienced developer, technical architect. And I was amazed by dynamic forms, but I also complained about something. I was like, I can't believe it. You can't do this. And I can't remember what it was, but he was like, are you joking? Like, I've waited all this time for dynamic forms and you're complaining about that. And for me, it was just like an obvious thing you'd be able to do, right? But for him, it's like, it's taken so long to get to this point. Like, you should be happy with what we've got.
Yep. Yeah, totally. And that's part of the fun of Salesforce, right? Is sometimes, I don't know how many times actually, where something you've been asked to deliver and you can't necessarily do it right now without code, but it's almost scary, really, when you might look at a roadmap or something and there's things in beta or there's stuff that's coming down the tube. And so, the client has been okay with, well, we might just hold off for a little bit. We're okay with standard, and we might wait and see whether this thing actually manifests as becoming generally available, right? So that they don't have to invest in all the development and so forth to build things that are going to be redundant or replaced with standard functionality within 1 or 2 releases. It's crazy. So just the fact, though, that I don't believe organizations necessarily are, if they're not set up to think about Salesforce as this kind of iterative, ever-changing beast, and setting up centers of excellence and involving the enterprise architecture group who need to be mindful that this thing does evolve over time. It has new capabilities coming up all the time. There's so many opportunities for customers who buy Salesforce to try and keep continually squeezing more out of it and getting more and more return on that investment. It's a Lamborghini in this kind of space, and people who buy it are going to get the most out of it if they take it in for a service every now and again, right? And,
yeah, so true. Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it, though, right? Because I think a lot of people just think it's plug and play and off you go, and it really isn't that any longer. But it also does, I think you still see customers that are blown away by the cost of the ongoing support model of having an admin and then having it continually developing the platform to ensure that it is still fit for purpose for their business and utilizing all of the features that you can. And people are still scared by that because they're like, oh, I just thought you had it and that was it. It's you get these releases every so often and off you go.
Yeah, and you think a couple of years ahead, and a client, if they haven't continually come back and check to see whether there's more and more things baked into their subscription that they could literally be leveraging within their organization, then it's missed opportunity. It's opportunity cost to them, right? They're paying for it, but they're not getting a lot out of it. It's like a gym subscription, right?
Yeah.
Gym membership. They're sponsoring and not getting the benefit. So in terms of challenges, to your original question, I think they're the 2 big ones. It's people and the impact that something like Salesforce has on them and on a daily basis. And the second part is an organization actually putting the framework in place to be able to manage such a ever-changing kind of beast, inside their organization, particularly if they haven't had something like this before.
Sure. So my next question was going to be around the products or the little apps that you've been releasing. And I was going to say, when did you start that? But now I know you built an S control way back.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I did that, and that was awesome. And I do it because I've had so many people help me, and just I'm continually amazed at how much of a community there is around the product, and people are so willing to help. And I think this infamous, SFDC Fox, he set the ball rolling for me because he was so willing to help. He was over in Belgium, I think, and at the time, and I just couldn't believe that somebody would, from the other side of the world, he didn't have to do anything, but he helped me create this thing. And so I've kind of run with that ever since. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I just see sometimes I might be able to help when I see people struggling with something. Maybe even colleagues who are really, or people who are really good with flow and things like that, but that's kind of they're constrained by the bounds of that. That was the most recent one. So people struggling with date times, it's like, oh, that stuff's hell. So Apex programmers have the luxury of all these methods. So why don't we just expose those methods to the flow guys so we can all benefit? They're only little things, but that S control, I used to laugh at the end of every month. I think that thing I left a little, because it was just HTML and JavaScript, I left a little cookie in it, like a tracker, a bit like a Google tracker thing.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I fully documented, hey, there's this thing in here. If you're happy to opt in, great. If you don't want it, here's the detail. This is what we rip out, because it was totally accessible, all the bits. It wasn't a managed package or anything. And people left it in there. And at the end of every month, because it was to do with pipeline management and cleaning up your revenue schedules and things, at the end of every month, you'd get tens of thousands of hits on this tracker.
No way.
Cookie thing. Yeah. And at times it would peak at like 100,000 uses over like 3 days, right? Because everyone was rushing to fix their pipeline at the end of every month. It was hilarious.
I bet you wish you put $1 charge on that per use.
Yeah. Oh, well.
You live and you learn, eh?
You live and you learn. Yeah. Well, yeah, it was good fun. I needed to do it out of necessity. Our pipeline was just mangled. So I had to fix it for us. And then I just was happy to share. Yeah,
for sure. So what keeps you, and we've spoken a lot about what's so great about Salesforce and the constant evolution, but what keeps you engaged and excited and not looking outside of the ecosystem for opportunities?
Yeah, okay. I put it down to 3 Ps. So one's the product. The fact that it's just impossible to keep up with it. Anyone who says they do, I would be very suspicious of, because it's just so broad. The 3 releases a year, hundreds of pages of release notes, things that change. It keeps it really interesting. There's always new ways to solve a problem, and you just can't rest on your laurels and go, well, because I've done it this way the last 10 times, it'll work the same on the 11th. You've got to continually say, well, is that the way Salesforce thinks it should be done? Is there a more elegant way? So you're continually reinventing your kind of points of view on some things. There's best practices, sure, but sometimes when you need to come up with creative solutions to things, you potentially don't have to be so creative. It might now be out of the box, like we said earlier.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, was product, people. The entire time I've been in this ecosystem, I've just loved the people who are all about helping each other get better at what you do. I've made lifelong friends. I've been fortunate enough to raise thousands of dollars for charity, doing various things when I was working at Salesforce. I've been surrounded by positivity and lots of great mentors, people who volunteered to mentor me. So that's awesome. And the last thing's potential. So it's kind of the 3 Ps, really: the product, people, and the potential. I totally love seeing people who come from really diverse backgrounds come into the ecosystem and build themselves a career. I've seen people who've come from hospitality now, flying high and doing, vice president training at one of the big SIs, right?
Who you're talking about?
You know who I'm talking about. But isn't that amazing? And kudos to them. They've totally run with it. But there's not too many opportunities in the world where you can come from a totally different background. I know I count myself in that, and be given so many opportunities to grab with 2 hands and to work hard at and reap a reward, and work in such a healthy industry that's, despite COVID, fortunate enough to keep working, lots of job opportunities, meeting people like yourself, it's amazing. So why would you want to move?
And it's not just like a local community either. That's what always amazes me about that. Like you mentioned, the SFDC Fox, and it truly is like global, but everyone kind of knows each other, and there's that collaboration across the world to help each other out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's incredible. It is a fairly small, in relative terms, ecosystem, I guess, to other platforms or products, but in some ways, that's probably just the way the company's grown, and the way the product started from something so small. It didn't start off a behemoth. It was a small thing, and there was a core group of people. I know people who are still at Salesforce now that were there when I started. They're still at that company. I think one of the tier 3 tech guys, Frank Zhang, he's famous within Salesforce. He's, he's a living legend, and he's still doing Salesforce stuff. So, Mike Burnside, another one, like he's a living legend there. So there's all these amazing people, and they've never left either. So there's something about it,
Yeah, for sure. So look, thank you so much. I know you to be a LinkedIn guy, but are you on any other platforms? If anyone wants to reach out, are you a Twitter guy or LinkedIn?
No, I don't do Twitter. No, I'm more than happy to speak to people on via LinkedIn, or and we can go from there, I guess. I find that's where most of the I get a lot of inspiration from some of the LinkedIn guys there. I think Johan is amazing. Recent CTA too, and he's just producing so much good content. So
he's killing it, isn't he? Like it's just I registered for his emails as well now, and it's constant. There's just always something interesting coming through, and I try and answer some of he's doing these Apex questions at the moment. And I haven't got one right so far.
Oh, haven't you? That's for when you do your platform too, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, one day maybe. But yeah, look, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the chat, and yeah, if anyone does reach out, obviously LinkedIn's the place, and looking forward to seeing what the next solution that you provide to the community is.
Oh, well, maybe people just ask. I'll come up with some little widget or something to help them out. Yeah,
nice.
Good fun.
Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate you having me.